Hey everyone, I'm Bambi Francisco Roizen, and this is CRT. This past week marked President Donald Trump's first 100 days of his second term. A lot has changed since Trump 1.0, not the least of which is we are in a country that has shifted culturally toward conservative values. We have traditional families, traditional gender roles, traditional definitions of manliness and femininity, and we've embraced smaller government that allows for individual liberties and free markets. And a big win for me, there's an openness toward Christian values, something I've not seen in the 20 years I've lived in California. I'll give my report card and later my interview with a pastor on religion, AI, and politics. Welcome to the show. Well, President Trump marked his first 100 days of his second term. His presidency is in stark contrast to the last 4 years for many reasons, not the least of which is, well, he's alive. He's very present. If he's not on TV or holding a press conference, he's on X or he's on Truth Social. I mean, the guy is omnipresent, and he is the definition of indefatigable. So, he won because of the economy and immigration. So let me give you the report card. On immigration, I give him an A+. On the economy, I give him a B. Foreign policy, I give him a B vis-a-vis Russia and Ukraine, although the rare minerals deal with Ukraine is a pretty big win. And on culture, I give him an A+++. So let me break that down, why I give him an A+++ on culture. I give him A+ on transparency. And think about this. What does transparency do? It creates a culture of openness and accessibility. As I said, Donald Trump and his administration is omnipresent. They're available. They're everywhere. They'll take calls. They'll do interviews. I give Trump and his team A+ on authenticity. And what does that do? That creates a culture of integrity. What you see is what you get, all warts and all. And then I give him an A+ on Christian values. So let me start there. Christian values have been castigated, reviled, always seen as unworthy of intellectual exploration or debate. As long as I've lived here in the Bay Area, Northern California, about 2 decades, it's always been seen as the ugly stepchild as far as cultural worldviews are concerned. I moved to San Francisco in 1999. It was already a very non-Christian city. And at that time, the new atheist movement was rising in prominence. It was very much in vogue. And the movement, sadly, emboldened many people to be condescending toward Christianity, if not vitriolic. But then something happened around 2010, so about 15 years ago. There was this insidious rise of the woke religion. And everyone has a different definition of woke. Mine is viewing the world through an oppressor and oppressed lens to subvert traditional values and truths. It's a religion that wants to liberate all these minority groups, criticizing anyone who doesn't like those groups as racist, homophobic, misogynist, xenophobic, etc. Many of you have probably been called those names. Now, this religion started to rise during the Obama years, as I said, around 2010, then kicked into overdrive during the Biden years. Now, that's not a coincidence that this new religion was sort of rising during what has largely been sort of Democratic controlled country with Obama and then Biden, a little bit of time with Trump in between from 2017 to 2020, but there was a lot happening in there with regards to sort of the complete polarity in the country because this religion was so embraced by the Democratic Party as a political position. And they catered to these minority groups. They continued to do so, again, from Obama to Biden, particularly the Muslim groups. Do you recall Obama refused to say Islamic terrorists? I know that was around 2016. He made that quite known. Last year, Kamala Harris said, quote, "We must reject offensive comments like radical Islamic terrorism. But no one hated this woke religion and democratic political position more than the new atheists. They viewed the Islamic faith as intolerant and militant. And in the last 15 years, definitely the last 4 years, the left kept pushing this religion to support this Muslims just outright without differentiating the Islamic terrorists and some bad apples in that faith. And they did this through censorship and top-down policies and laws. And the result, well, we saw it. We're seeing it. It's a big backlash that drew the most unlikely of bedfellows together, atheists and Christians. Some former atheists even acknowledged that the only way to fight this religious war was with religion itself. Well-known thinker Ayaan Hirsi Ali shifted to the right, denouncing atheism and embracing Christianity. She went public with an essay titled, "Why I Am Now a Christian, Atheism Can't Equip Us for Civilizational War." Here's what Ayaan said in her post. She said, "So what changed? Why do I call myself a Christian? Part of the answer is that global Western civilization is under threat from three different but related forces: the resurgence of great power authoritarianism and expansionism in the first of the Chinese Communist Party and Vladimir Putin's Russia, the rise of global Islamism, which threatens to mobilize a vast population against the West, and the viral spread of woke ideology, which is eating into the moral fiber of the next generation." And Richard Dawkins also had kind words to say about Christianity, saying he preferred to live in a culturally Christian world than an Islamic one. Joe Rogan, who spent years denigrating Christians, even he had his own Jesus moment in 2024 where he famously said, "We need Jesus." Watch this video.
People are going to understand the need to have some sort of divine structure to things, some sort of belief in the sanctity of love and of truth. And a lot of that comes from religion. A lot of people's moral compass and the guidelines that they've used to follow to live a just and righteous life has come from religion. And unfortunately, a lot of very intelligent people, they dismiss all of the positive aspects of religion because they think that the stories are mere superstitious fairy tales, that, you know, they have no place in this modern world, and, you know, we're inherently good and your ethics are based on your own moral compass and we all have one. And that's not necessarily true. We need Jesus. I think, for real. Like, if he came back now, it'd be great. Like, Jesus, if you're thinking about coming back
right now,
now's a good time.
Yeah, pretty soon. Yeah.
Now's a good time.
Yeah, now would be a good time. So now while we saw the shift towards spirituality, we also saw the same people shift right politically. Both Ayaan and Joe Rogan endorsed Donald Trump. Was it because they were voting for Christianity? Of course not. But it was their vote against wokeism. Richard Dawkins said as much, commenting on the elections. Dawkins said this on X: "Voters voted for Trump because they were, quote, fed up with being told they must be racist just because they're white and patronized if they deny women can have penises," end quote. So if a vote for Trump and the Republicans was a vote against wokeism, then Christianity won. Now, some Christians may say, wait a second, I'm a Christian. I did not vote for that man. I don't feel like Christianity won. Well, this isn't surprising. There's always a division in the church. In 1 Corinthians 1:10, Paul writes, "I appeal to you, brothers and sisters, in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, that all of you agree with one another in what you say, and that there be no divisions among you." So then, how do we find common ground? Well, I think first we have to find where we disagree. And so for those Christians who are upset about Trump in the office, and I've heard your arguments, I've read many arguments, I've read them, that Christians like myself are not compassionate enough and supportive of the poor and the minorities. Well, this Christianity is a form of liberation theology. It's an approach to Christianity that focuses on the plight of the oppressed. It focuses more on social transformation in the world, and it's a very materialistic view of the world. And this shouldn't surprise us because it has its roots in Marxism. But to be honest, I'm not a fan of this theology. I can agree, I can like many of these Christians who follow this theology, but I don't like the theology because I think it's a departure from the traditional Christian ethos of being saved by grace and having this personal relationship and interaction with God that drives us to glorify God in whatever way we're called. It's a very personalized interaction. And I think that's what God wants and Jesus wants. In the Bible, it says, give unto Caesar what is Caesar's. And yes, we should do that. There is a government, and we should give government to pave the streets, fix the potholes, pick up the garbage. I'm sure have some safety nets and some welfare programs. But I say again, because I've said this so many times, we don't say give unto Caesar so Caesar can give to the poor. That's not what we should do. And here's a really good story in the Bible that reflects my sentiments that we shouldn't be giving money to the government, or a lot of money to the government, for all its policies that support the poor. Take a look at Mary. So the story of Mary, she's pouring expensive perfume on Jesus's feet. I mean, think about this perfume. One of my pastors I heard said, I can't remember how much it is, but it's expensive. Perfume is expensive today as it is, but this perfume is super expensive. It might have been like a whole year's wages for people back then. So it was a very expensive perfume. So she takes the whole thing and she pours it all over Jesus's feet. And Judas says, like, oh my goodness, don't pour this perfume on Jesus's feet. I'm like, that's like a year's wage. Are you crazy? And we could have had that money for the poor. I had all of these, activities that I was going to do, and people lined up to be doing all of these things for the poor people. And you just threw all that money away because you just took that perfume. You did what you wanted to do. Bad Mary, not good. I'm not happy. And that's Judas who's criticizing her. But in that Bible verse, it says specifically Judas didn't care for the poor. He just said that. He just occasionally stole from the money bag. So he didn't really care for the poor. The Bible specifically tells us that Judas didn't really care for the poor, but he did hold the money bags, and occasionally he stole from this. This tells me Jesus wants us to be wary of the Judases of this world who say we need to always stand up for the poor above anything else. What this passage reminds us of is that we should glorify God in our own personalized way. Take our money, take our perfume, and pour it on Jesus's feet. And if that means not supporting government policies, not giving the money to Judas who holds the money bags so he can help the poor, so be it. We can be merry in our own way. And I think Jesus will bless that. Well, speaking of being wary of Judases out there and those holding the money bags, one of the big wins under the Trump administration was exposing the corruption in government. Taxpayers thinking they were giving money to the poor, perhaps, well, they found their dollars being spent on ideological activities and boondoggles. This is thanks in large part to DOGE, the department by Musk to reduce wasteful spending. Recall the waste that was found, a lot of taxpayer dollars going towards the production of transgender operas, transgender comic books, a DEI musical. Money was even spent on sex changes in Guatemala. Other organizations have been actively exposing waste as well. Here's one from Chris Rufo of the Manhattan Institute, who found $1 billion in grants that went toward mental health programs, but they were really used to advance left-wing socialism and discrimination. which, by the way, probably continue to create and feed into the mental health crisis this country is dealing with. Now, of course, these costs are small potatoes compared to big spending items, but it's something. And hopefully we have this video here. I will talk about the something in terms of, or the more spending costs that have been identified that hopefully will not be spent. But before that, we do have a video of Big Balls. He's part of the Doge team, and Big Balls, unfortunately, was sort of villainized and vilified in the press, but he's such a cute kid. Big Balls is the young guy. He's like 18 years old, and he's part of the Doge team. And I believe we have that video from Jesse Waters, who finally meets Big Balls.
That should be obvious.
Why do they call you Big Balls?
I just said it as my LinkedIn username.
Okay.
Well, people on LinkedIn take themselves like super seriously, and they're pretty adverse to risk. And I was like, well, I want to be neither of those things. So I said it, and honestly, I didn't even think anyone would notice.
Yeah.
So what do you
LinkedIn
do?
is so cringe.
What does Big Balls do?
Right now, I'm working on some payment computer stuff. So one of our initiatives is to root out fraud and waste. And to do that, we started looking at the payment computers. And as mentioned earlier, like there is no accounting of what payments actually go to in the payment computer. So like you look at a specific line item, like $20 million, and you're like, okay, well, what is this money going to? And for the majority of payment systems, it's like, well, we don't really know. And
Yeah, they're like, what? That would be the response.
Is this the most basic responses?
Yeah,
yeah.
that's the most common response.
What do you say when people just say, I don't know?
Well, it's a huge cause for concern because like the upstream thing, which is distributing the money, literally has no checks and no accountability to the actual American taxpayer. So it's a huge vector for fraud, waste, and abuse.
Do these people not respect taxpayer money?
I mean, there's no incentive to.
I'm so impressed with Big Balls. I mean, the name notwithstanding, the guy is pretty mature. He is going to go places. I mean, look at him. He's like babyface. Maybe they should call him babyface Big Balls. But he's so cute and well dressed. He is such a role model, I think, for teenagers, of course, because he's only a teenager himself. Well, he's a role model for all of us adults as well. He handles himself very well, and he is doing some big things. And I also want to say to a lot of the people who have criticized him and criticized the whole department for hiring these young kids, they, this job of scrolling through spreadsheets to find waste and fraud. I mean, it's a very thankless job. We should be thanking guys like Big Balls and not criticizing him and accusing him and the Doge team of trying to steal our social security numbers. I mean, they're quite happy, and I'm pretty sure, and they have enough money. So I think we need to praise these guys and really acknowledge that he's doing quite a lot of work. So anyway, wanted to just give take my hat off to Big Balls because I wanted you to see who he was. Not really a villain. Okay, so back to how much money the Doge team is finding. Well, according to a Reuters report, the Trump administration is withholding $436 billion in approved spending. The report highlights $42 billion canceled at the State Department, which includes USAID, along with another $62 billion plus in competitive grant funding for the Transportation Department, according to the estimate. The Democrats also detailed $943 million frozen for the Head Start early education program and more than $10 billion in frozen and canceled funding for the Natural Resources Conservation Service. Now, much of these cuts will have to be voted on in Congress, so let's hope Congress can make these cuts permanent. But we're already seeing what the decline in government spending is impacting, or how it's impacting the economy. We saw GDP in the first quarter flatten out. That's partly due to a decline in government spending and a big hike in imports. This hike in imports due to American companies piling up inventory in anticipation of the tariffs they're expected to kick in shortly. Now I'm all for a global economic reset. We need to cut better deals because we should ignite an industrial revolution here in the US. As for the stock market, it needed to deflate. I'm a big believer that you wouldn't want to be buying the market at the end of 2024. It had to come down. It needed to reset, and now's a good time and a good buying opportunity, possibly. So I always look at these opportunities, these times of uncertainties as opportunities for people to come in, sort of dollar cost average as you buy on the dip. It's a good time. So I see that as positive. But I will say, with regards to the tariffs, there are consequences to the harsh rhetoric around tariffs against some of these countries. And also, particularly with Canada, there's been harsh rhetoric there about making Trump saying that he wants Canada to be the 51st state. And Mark Carney and his Liberal Party, well, they won the Canadian election. Carney is a former governor of the Bank of Canada. He ran the Bank of England. Yeah, that's right. There was an election there. It was triggered in January when former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau resigned from his role as Liberal Party leader. Trudeau, who served for 10 years, he became very unpopular. In fact, many thought Conservative Party leader Pierre Poilievre would have won given his popularity earlier this year, but that obviously changed. And many say Conservatives lost in Canada because of Trump's rhetoric. So it's not a good thing. I thought it might have, I didn't think that, I thought that the Conservative Party leader was so popular that he would actually win the election in Canada, but that didn't happen. So that is a problem because ultimately the war against China can't be a bilateral one, US versus China. The fact of the matter is China is much larger than the US and we need our allies. And it doesn't look like Canada will be an easy one to work with. Now for some good news, great news and accomplishments actually by Trump organization in his first 100 days. I want to say that, and I've already said this earlier, but I'm going to say it again, he ushered in the most transparent administration, especially compared to Biden's. Watch his latest cabinet meeting.
You want to just describe what you saw?
So they're investing $165 billion in 1,100 acres in Arizona.
Secondly, Mr. President, like too many organizations in the federal government, the ODNI has become very bloated with too much waste and abuse going on within the organization.
And we need smart kids in this country, and we need healthy kids. And thank you for your leadership. We're going to get there. We're reviewing the GRAS standards now we're revamping them.
Well, so not only is this administration transparent, it's bipartisan. On Trump's team were as you saw, two prominent Democrats who ran for president. And while this looks a bit like watching The Apprentice, this public gathering does show that everyone must attend and must give their to-dos, and not only that, their accomplishments, underscoring demands from this president to expect his team to be goal-driven. And of course, what makes this administration unique, even more unique, is it's one billionaire working for free.
You know, they say I wear a lot of hats. It's true. Even my hat has a hat. You know, the American people voted for secure borders, safe cities, and sensible spending. And that's what they've gotten. A tremendous amount has been accomplished in the first 100 days. As everyone has said, it's more than has been accomplished in any administration before, ever, period. This portends very well for what will happen for the rest of the administration. I think this could be the greatest administration since the founding of the country.
Well, we all want to thank you for your help, too. You really have sacrificed a lot. You've been treated very unfairly.
All right. Well, so what else? So Trump issued 143 executive orders, which society has accepted as a way of governing these days. Some of those are comical, like the renaming of the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America. Some of these orders are symbolic, like withdrawing from the World Health Organization. And these orders were essential, like the announcement that there are two sexes and that men cannot play in women's sports.
I'll sign a historic executive order to ban men from competing in women's sports. It's about time.
Another success for Trump were his actions on the border. He immediately issued executive orders to close it, something most Americans wanted. On the 100th day, here was Tom Homan, border czar, talking about the administration's actions and results.
A few things. Look, I started in Border Patrol in 1984. I've been at this for over 40 years. I worked for 6 presidents, starting with Ronald Reagan. Every president I ever worked for took border security seriously, because you can't have national security if you don't have strong border security. We got to know who's coming in, what's coming in, where's coming in, why it's coming in, right? Even President Obama and President Clinton took some steps to secure the border because they understood national security was important. Joe Biden was the first president in the history of this nation who came in office and unsecured a border on purpose. That's just a fact. We handed the Biden administration, after President Trump's first administration, we handed the Biden administration the most secure border in my lifetime, and he unsecured it on purpose. Now, President Trump and this administration here, the success is unprecedented. We beat Trump's first administration on border success. Border numbers are historic low. Today, as I'm standing here, we have the most secure border in the history of this nation. And the numbers prove it. President Trump's policies are saving lives every day. There's been studies done that says 31% of women that make that journey through use of cartels. When President Trump has illegal immigration down 96%, when 96% less people are coming, how many women aren't being cartels? How many children aren't dying making that journey? How many women and children aren't being into this nation?
Well, Homan goes on to articulate that the average number of illegal crossings daily was 11,000 to 15,000 under Biden. Now it's down to 178. That's 11,000 to 15,000 a day, down to 178 under Trump. Known gotaways averaged more than 1,800 daily under Biden. Now it's 38 under Trump. This is all good news, because the drop in illegal crossings comes with a drop in fentanyl crossing the border. About 1 in 3 women crossing the border are victims. One study showed that 60% of unaccompanied minors crossing the border were forced into and drug trafficking. Now, if you think these migrant numbers aren't real, if we're making this all up, right-wing media is making this all up, well, take a look at PBS, a PBS report showing the record number of crossings. We have 1.73 million in 2021, 2.37 million in 2022, and 2.47 million in 2023. As for the problems all of this caused, it wasn't just fentanyl coming into the country, crime, and forced child labor. The flood of migrants coming into the country also created a problem with homelessness, people on the streets. Once again, here's PBS reporting this time pointing out the shelter crisis due to the border crossings.
Remain for migrants in New York City and across the U.S., even once they're in the country.
And here's the sharp contrast between Biden and Trump. Again, another contrast, this time on handling the border. In 2024, the media wrote that Biden, well, he couldn't shut down the border because, well, it was just too complicated. Biden and his team continued to say that their hands were tied. and that no executive orders could do anything to stop the problem. No, they needed Congress to act first. Remember? Watch.
Action, because we know that that bill did not have a path forward in the Republican-led House. Absent congressional action, does the president have authority? There is a section of the Immigration and Nationality Act that says he can suspend entry if he finds that entry of migrants is quote unquote detrimental to the United States. Should he use that authority to bring down those numbers that you know are taxing resources in our system?
We have not given up on Congress in terms of its ability to actually fulfill its responsibility to the American people. We are always considering what we as an administration can do in the shadow of Congress's failure to act.
Well, we knew they were lying about that. We knew they were lying about a lot of things, not the least of which was that Biden was 100% there in mind, body, and spirit. He was, of course, very frail and very mentally drained. You remember that. He was selfishly propped up by a party that wanted to bait and switch the American people because what they stood for wasn't what American people wanted. Remember, what they stood for was making white males feel guilty about their history of oppression and privilege. But what kind of winning message is that for your party? It's no wonder they lost the white male voters. 60% of white male voters voted for Trump in 2024, up from 58% in 2020. And the Democrats, they knew they had a problem with white male voters. But their answer to that was Tim Walz.
There's folks that I recognize are smarter than me. They analyze this. You put your input in. Running a campaign that had never been run before, 100 days, in the situation we were at, running against a very unusual opponent on the other side. Mm-hmm. And look, my job was to do, look, I knew I was on the ticket. I would argue because we did a lot of amazing progressive things in Minnesota that improved people's lives. But I also was on the ticket, quite honestly, you know, because I could code talk to white guys watching football, fixing their truck, doing that I could put them at ease. I was the permission structure to say, look, you can do this and vote for this. And you look across those swing states, with the exception of Minnesota, we didn't get enough of those votes.
But you could be giving.
Oh my God, he's being ridiculed again for this, and rightly so. First of all, men call him Tampon Tim. You don't bring in Tampon Tim to win in the white male vote, let alone the male vote. And watching football and fixing trucks, that's supposed to be a white guy thing. I mean, imagine this. I guess they're thinking that some guy is in his garage, kind of working on his carburetor, working on his car. And in the background, there's football. But then he also hears on the radio, well, Tim Walz is a white guy, and he too loves football, and he too fixes cars. And the guy's like, oh man, yeah, maybe I should vote for Harris and Walz because, you know, I have a lot in common with that guy. That's no. That is not, first of all, it's not a white guy thing, watching football and fixing your cars. And by the way, not all white guys or guys even fix their cars. I know a lot of guys who, you know, don't know how to fix cars. A lot of them do watch football though. So, but that's not what a white guy or any guy wants in a male role model. I'll tell you what real men like. They like integrity. That's what gets them. That's what attracts them to other men. Men honor and respect men of honor. That's what attracts men. And this guy Walz was not a man of honor. I mean, he lied so many times, and putting on a costume like he did to say, I'm a white guy and my costume of watching football and fixing my car, none of that is going to is going to sell, because everybody can see right through it. They know who you are. You are a big liar. You talked about carrying weapons into combat, but you didn't. You didn't. And as an explanation, you said you misspoke because of grammar issues. You had grammar problems. So you accidentally said you carried weapons into combat. You said you were in Hong Kong during Tiananmen Square, the Tiananmen Square protests in 1989. You weren't there, Tim. You suggested the family used IVF to have kids. You suggested that your family had used IVF to have kids. You did that for political reasons. So Tim and the rest of the Democrats, I would say, you need to take a step back and you need to start conducting some needed soul searching. You've continued to market yourself as resistance, holding rallies and protests using profane language or gimmicks like 25-hour speeches or cringy video game skits to show that you're fighting for the people. But resistance, gimmicks, costumes, they can only get you so far. At some point, you have to have a product. At some point, you have to have product market fit before you market your product. For now, in startup parlance, you're in the very early seed stages of who you are and what you stand for. But that's fine with me. Keep putting on costumes. Keep putting on rallies. Because right now, Americans and Christians are winning. Now let's get to that interview. All right. Hey, Jay, I'm speaking with Jay Cooper, pastor at Violet Crown City Church, a United Methodist community of faith in Austin, Texas. Hey, Jay.
Hi, Abby. Glad to be here. This is an important and fun conversation.
Thanks for joining us. I want to talk to you about something from 2023. So as I asked you before we started filming, do you even remember that? That was such a long time ago. But you had ChatGPT generate a sermon for you. And it's funny because 2023, a lot has changed in 2023. So I bet if you asked ChatGPT to do the same thing today, it would be very different. But let's talk about that. What did you ask ChatGPT to do, and what did it come up with?
Sure. Yes. So fall of 23, this conversation was kind of heating up. We have a lot of tech types in our congregation. And, as we go out and we're in community and doing studies, AI kept coming up. And I thought, in the vein of being gentle as doves and wise as serpents, we need to be wise to the world around us. I know Luke 12:56 is key to this time together. And so thought our people really need to not only understand this technology, but understand the discernment around it. So from there, I decided, and I thought, surely a lot of people have done this. This will just kind of be an interesting experiment for our people. Had ChatGPT develop an entire service from the call to worship to the time of prayer, children's message, sermon, and even one unique song.
And so were you happy with the results? Were the first inputs? Because I know when I put in stuff into ChatGPT now, I'm like, it's always asking me for more. Very polite, but constantly asking me for more. And obviously, because they need more information. You can't think, they can't think in our heads, right? They don't know what's happening in their heads. So we have to give them as much input as possible.
Right. Yes. So I should say that it's not like I had a single prompt that was create an entire worship service. When I did that, it came back with something very short. There's no way our people could have gotten the full experience. So I did have to follow up with several more prompts. And then throughout the service, I would share what the prompt was that I put. And I changed it each time. For instance, give us a traditional call to worship, a more of a progressive time of prayer, these kind of things, so that people could see how the prompts certainly changed each of the sections of it. So yes, it did need a lot of finesse.
And I'm sure you came in and spoke around it. Sounds like that's what you did. you said that you had a lot of tech folks. I mean, Austin, I mean, I'm in Silicon Valley, so I know there's yeah, a lot of techies. And so did it appeal to them? Did this experiment appeal to them?
It did, yes. And you had kind of asked in the beginning. I think the response within our community was very positive, because we laid a lot of groundwork in advance for it. We would never ever do an aha, surprise after the service is over. That was all Chat GPT. That's just manipulative and not fair. So we have a lot of tech types, but we also have some people who are in their 70s and 80s. And their response was the most surprising, that they felt informed. They didn't see it as some young person's issue, that they wanted to know if they could potentially get some sort of call sounding like a grandchild that was not actually their grandchild asking for money, these kind of things. So it served not only a practical purpose, but an introduction to a spiritual conversation. And so whether they were 20s in tech or 70s and retired, we all gathered for a big conversation afterwards and kind of debriefed and got some really good responses.
So was the sermon sort of why we shouldn't be afraid of tech? I mean, what was the sermon on?
Right. So I had this sermon kind of do a self-critique. How can we discern truth in a world with AI? And to kind of see it, not that it is any way sentient, but kind of how would it interpret some of those questions? And it really came down on this, this solid rock of truth that, through discernment, through scripture. I would not say, I'll just say this, it did not say anything that came across as unorthodox, so to speak. It said, we must rely on Christ, discernment, scripture, wise counsel, and all of these things. And then if you'd like me to, I can share a little bit of the song it wrote as well.
Yeah, you made me think of something like, what if a computer read the Bible in and out, and rationally viewed the Bible? What does it spit out? What does it, can it be objective, or are we missing that emotional part, that makes us human and separate from a robot?
Right. That was the big question that came out of it. For me, the experiment was worthwhile, and we will not be doing it again. Mostly because I believe in the messy spirit, and that it should refinement and kind of information is not the purpose, although we must marry our knowledge with spirit. For me, it was very much missing the emotional side of it.
Yeah.
And there may come a day where can people see or hear what is the difference between something that is, human or AI? Perhaps we're already past that. And that's why I appreciate you doing this time together, because great discernment is needed.
Great discernment is needed. And I also think that, I'm a writer. That's sort of my background. So I've had to edit a lot of people, and a lot of voices, and I can tell if it's Chat GPT. It's dry, doesn't have that emotion.
Interesting.
And I can tell the difference between the different writers that I have, because I just know who they are. Some of them are just super funny, and they can't take it out of their writing, which is great. But I do think that, and maybe this is jumping ahead, I just wonder if one day, if the robots read enough of our work, read enough of your work, where you could say, write me a sermon that Pastor Jay would talk about on this particular topic, once the robots know you a lot. So tell me about the song that it came up with, because that's one place where you might be able to use AI in some places to sort of support your service, your sermon.
Right. So we said write a unique song based on the sermon you just wrote. And I mean, some of the lyrics, so it was called Solid Rock of Truth. And I can just, it went on with the self-critique. So one verse being, as algorithms spin webs of lies, we lift our gaze to the endless skies where Christ's teaching illuminate our way, dispelling falsehoods with the light of day. And so I enjoyed it, doing kind of a critique of, the falsehoods that can be weaved throughout AI, and trying to put a little humor into it as well. In the sermon, I had said, interject some humor. And of course, the jokes were like, I'm a dad, and worse than any dad joke I've ever told. But okay, so to your point about creating lyrics, I have to tell you, our musicians did not feel super comfortable singing a song such as this. I think they are very aware of, a musician's livelihood and these kind of things. It felt inauthentic. However, I have heard some churches beginning to say, hey, what better lyrics could be produced than one that is based on the sermon I just preached? So I'd be interested to hear your thoughts about something like that.
I mean, I know it's coming. So back in 1999, Google created Google News. I don't know if you remember. I mean, I've been in technology for a long time. And so as writers and journalists, we were all like, that's so funny. Google's going to be in the news business, and they're going to create their own platform, and it's going to be news. And the first thing that Google had on was a press release. And we said, see, they can't do it. They put it on the news page. The first thing they had was a press release. And we said, they can't even tell the difference between a press release and an actual news story. Well, today, everybody wants to. You're found on Google News. It's a great resource. They've really cleaned it up. You don't know, obviously, the editors in Google News, there's no editors. It's depending on how, timing of your posts, how many links you have on it. There are no editors, but it's still a good resource. So with regards to AI and taking jobs of these creative jobs, I do think it is scary, because I think it will get better in writing. And it scares me to think about where we have to go to differentiate ourselves. And I'll give you a little background again, as a news person, around 2006 was when Facebook launched its news feed. Okay. And this was when you could just see what everybody was doing. Today, everybody knows what a news feed is. Back then, nobody knew what a news feed was. I mean, they didn't know what a social media thing was, let alone a news feed. And I said that, oh my gosh, news feed, what's going to happen is that the news is going to be all about us. That's it. It's going to be a world where we're going to be fascinated. The tabloids, Facebook was going to be today's tabloid. And I don't know why I went down that rabbit hole, but I guess the whole point is that it's just you don't know how these things are going to change the medium, the news business, etc.
Right. You're absolutely right. I'm hanging on that saying, where do we go to differentiate ourselves? That would be a little bit of my concern as related to musicians and others, loss of jobs. My good news is around hope, always holding on to hope. And if people lose hope, and where is their place in this world? How are they contributing? Is those places maybe where they can contribute are taken away? That's a concern I have.
Losing hope or losing.
Correct. Yeah. So from losing your job, or you say, this is how I contribute to the world, the gifts I've been given, and then suddenly if AI can basically replicate or even do better those gifts that you have to give, how do you find your place in the world when you've been told, this program can do it better than you, sorry. Perhaps I should include myself in that. The ultimate kick would have been if I would have led this service and then the congregation would have been like, wow, we pay you because this was just free and better than you. I don't think it's going to get there, but it did go through my head.
Yeah. Well, especially I just spoke to the Sam Altman founded this company called World, and they just released a new sort of eye sensor. So it's basically to differentiate a human from a bot. So we definitely, there's, they believe that, and I believe, yes, it's going to be harder and harder and harder to determine what is a human, what is a bot. I mean, if I can turn on my computer and turn on somebody who looks like you, but who's not you, and is giving a sermon who's better because he's been fed with all of these different things, that is scary.
Right.
And so it is scary for pastors. Look, it's scary for journalists. Everybody's a journalist now, or everybody's got a podcast. Everybody has a media platform. It's extremely diffused, but that in a way, it's a good thing, right? I mean, it's a good thing to have multiple voices. As somebody who started at CNN, when CNN was a big deal because we only had ABC, NBC, CBS, and then all of a sudden we had CNN, and then Fox, and then MSNBC, CNBC. And then all of a sudden, the turn of the century, we've got like, boom,
Right.
We've got all of these different voices. That's made it hard for a traditional journalist, right? A traditional journalist is now in the pool of everybody else.
Right. Bambi.
Pastors, that's your job too, in many ways. You're a journalist for God.
I hadn't thought about it like that, but I think that's accurate, and I'll embrace that.
Yeah, that kind of like, I mean, you're kind of, difference though, like the source, who is God, is available to everybody, right? Not just you. But
right. I don't have an confidential.
You don't have the bat phone to God, and we're not back to those old days where we have to go to Pastor Jay to find out what God is saying.
No, and that is for the best of everyone. But
yeah, that would be good. But yeah, so for your business, I think honestly, where I see it now, I don't think it is able to take on a persona just yet, AI. But I do think it's doing a really good job when it comes to images, when it comes to creating that. I think that right now is one of the first places to go in terms of jobs, is just, creating images, creating logos. There are a lot of people, designers, who could lose their jobs pretty quickly.
Absolutely. That's something for me to be aware of, and my other colleagues is, using an image that fits our sermon perfectly or whatever it may be. I had read something about kind of the environmental impact of this. I'm not researched enough to actually know, but it's probably worth doing more research as to, how are my creation of images impacting the world or artist or whatever it may be.
Okay. So here's some questions for you about how you support your sermon, because there's a lot of Bible apps out there, and then there's a lot of new technologies. Sounds like you're not going to go back to ChatGPT to generate a sermon for you, but how are you experimenting with these new technologies today?
Right. I think at first, after the service, I was very sheepish and felt a little black and white that we won't be using it. But after time, have come to realize there are some very helpful ways. I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, because, if we could say that God could use this tool as a means by which we share the good news with people. So I've done it to do sermon research. Tell me about the Apostle Paul's interactions with certain kind of people. Give me some sermon series ideas based around XYZ. I've used it I've used Notebook LM with Google to summarize a sermon,
Mhm,
and then kind of create some Bible study points. And then on much of this, I'll kind of use that as an outline and then shape it as I need. And then, in relation to what we're doing here today, I have fed a sermon into Notebook LM to have a podcast created. And it was decent. I'll say that at best. It was very much trying to be kind of an informal, oh gosh, and so the world of politics, and religion, what do you think? It didn't quite capture the spirit. It's not for a study guide, but I did find it to be interesting. So those are the ways I'm supporting kind of, I guess I'll say Sunday worship. And there's some other ways I've been trying to use it for the sake of church ministry.
And I guess also online services. I mean, obviously, ever since people have gotten used to that. So you leverage that. I'm sure you leverage YouTube or Rumble or whatever platform you have. And then there would be maybe church giving would be online through an app, possibly. So that's different. That's changed.
Yeah, I'd say 90% of our giving is online, I would bet. Back in the day of passing the plate, people just, especially younger folks, do not carry cash.
And then yeah, that's true. They don't. And then you're going to be paid with digital assets pretty soon.
Right.
Pretty soon, Bitcoin. So, I mean, another thing, and here's an analogy between what's happening with your church service. And I actually never really thought this, but you are, again, like a journalist. Like I'm a reporter, journalist. Where we speak for a living, we talk for a living, we report for a living. And one of the things that happened in journalism that I saw was sort of this movement towards opinion and movement towards politics. And one of the things that you wrote, and by the way, this was never the case, I think, when I was growing up, or even like 10 years ago, you wouldn't talk about that. So I remember I was in San Francisco and I was in charge of giving the prayers, the opening prayers, which I was very honored to do. And one time they started editing my stuff. They're like, "Oh, you're getting too political." So I was like, "Oh, okay." I thought we were supposed to try to get everybody. I was like, "Okay." So I actually literally had to hand in my speeches before, and then you gave a sermon. And by the way, so this is what I'm saying with what's happening with journalism too, is that in a good and in a bad way, in the old days, you could have a number of sources as a journalist. So you reported because you got to the source. But with the proliferation of of platforms and voices, not many people had access to the source. So what they did was they wrote around it. They basically gave their opinion. They gave their conjecture or whatever, right? Because you had to create content. You couldn't repeat what everybody else was saying. So in many ways, you had a lot of people creating and getting an opinion and getting political, because a lot of that was just fusing into the journalism. And perhaps that's what's happening now with the church, because you had a sermon, which is great. You said to keep politics out of church is to keep Jesus out of the church. So you were saying that, you know what, we should talk about this. We should talk about politics. And I also believe that as well, that politics is sort of the way of the way that we communicate now. It's very much part of reflecting of the value system that people have, and maybe that's why we need to talk about it. So I think that was very brave of you to do that. So I wanted to ask you about that that sermon and why you felt like you wanted to do that. I only saw one of your sermons, so I don't know if you've been doing that for a while, but
right. As you're more aware than I am, even, of this kind of politically fraught time, It is important to me. I think if I misattribute this, I think there's a theologian, Karl Barth, who at the time had said, it's important to preach with the Bible in one hand and a newspaper in the other. And so to update that old saying of, your phone and news feed in one hand and Bible in the other. And so I do see when Jesus comes preaching and teaching about a kingdom, it's an alternative kingdom. And, Jesus is Lord. That stands in sharp contrast to Caesar is Lord. And so I do see it political in that Jesus is trying to introduce a different way of living and moving and being and of worship and who we worship. And so I see those things all as political. Just the way it engages the full person, political being of or for the people. And God, I think, is of or for the people. And so I just want to make sure that we are speaking to issues of that, are engaging people where they are, what they're thinking. The church does have some important discernment to do about the way it shares about those. But, growing up, I heard so many sermons and I can't remember a single one of them. I'm not sure I'd left, thinking and wrestling more than when I was there. And so I would, if people disagree with something I shared, that's okay, because then I believe hopefully God is doing some work in them to say, do further scripture reading, talk to some other trusted folks, read, and I'm going to try to, shape and mold you to good news here. And so it does spark some great conversations. So I try my best, and I probably fail often to not be partisan. But I think to be political is to just engage in some of the issues that Jesus did, while approaching it from I'm trying to follow in the way of Jesus. What does that look like in my world today?
It's funny when you say not to be political, but when you say you're being political, it typically means you're being partisan.
Right. Yes.
Yeah, but you can be political without being partisan. And I'm a big believer. I always think that I have my views, but I always think you need to find common ground. And I think that there's definitely places where you can find common ground. How did your congregation receive, what you said? Because I remember when there's definitely, that's when the time when churches started, losing people, whether it was because they shut down and it wasn't their fault, but they shut down, people found other places where people couldn't go. But when that was there, it definitely started seeing things come apart. So how did that work in your church? Did you get a lot of people who were like, yeah, that's great, or a lot of people that just said, wait a second, what's going on here?
No, I think it's a good question. I feel very lucky in that I've gained a lot of trust with our folks. I try to preach and teach in ways that it's not like this is the final word of God, because I'm wrestling with it just like everyone else. I try to leave space that I am, sinful and fallen person, and I misinterpret and do so people will say, okay, I appreciate that word of openness and grace. And so they receive it very well. And I'm very grateful for that. I think people do want to go to a place that talks about real world issues. I've been, as they say, doom scrolling or whatever it may be, or I'm excited about what I'm seeing in the news. Where does that meet my faith as a follower of Jesus? And, how do I love my neighbor? They're voting for someone different than me and whatever it may be. And Jesus calls me to love them. We got to wrestle with that. What does that look like? And so I think where the rubber meets the road, our church, is really growing. And I think people are engaging because we want to talk about true life and not just like an abstract spirituality.
No, and I think that I think thinking about true life, and I mean, definitely taking what you learned from church and trying to apply it. That's one of the things that you try to, that, you know, you try to do, help people, right? Like, how do I, like, I remember my pastor's always like, oh, how do we apply this? Like, oh, that's great. Love what you had to say. And I can just walk out of here because, you know, it's just Bible reading, but I don't really know how to apply this to my life.
Right.
And so, and I mean, one of the reasons why I started my We Over Me platform was because I wanted to, I wasn't hearing a lot of this stuff at church. And so I wanted to kind of apply the Bible to my life more so. So looking at the world and you know, everything that's happening in the world through the lens of the Bible, which is sort of the why I started this platform and the platform Culture, Religion, and Technology, because I knew that we had to talk more about, we need to talk more about religion as it relates to culture, as it relates to how we innovate. And then obviously it becomes very political, because all of a sudden you're starting saying, wait a second, because it's, you know, how we govern ourselves is obviously very political. That's politics, right? And so, you know, anyway, I digress. So how often do you talk about politics in your services?
I mean, it is by no means the central aspect. I would say if there is a recurring theme around which I preach is what does it mean to follow in the way of Jesus and commit ourselves to the way he loved and lived and sacrificed and gave and taught. And so that's kind of the thread. You know, I'll talk about loss and grief and, you know, the human character and the desire we have to belong and find community and need for forgiveness. And so I would not say by any means it's a driving factor.
Right. I mean, maybe you'll talk about it every once in a while, because there's so much more that you should be talking about. I have a weekly Bible study, and I don't think we bring it up ever. So during the weekly Bible study, but so back into what you said in terms of, and I think you said this in your sermon, in terms of what are the ways you should be thinking about politics and Jesus. I think you pointed out 3 things. I thought that was really interesting. If I can find it, you brought out 3 things, if you even remember it.
You would think I would remember. Oh gosh.
Well, I mean, I think you would. And I think that this is something that, and the reason I bring this up is because I just covered the Pope passing away last week.
Okay.
So, and I talked about his legacy. So one of the things you said was politics always chooses the side of the poor and the oppressed, which I believe is Pope Francis's policy. I believe that's a lot of people's policy and stance as well. And I certainly, not obviously, you don't know me, but I do, you know, I feel for the poor, the homeless, and the oppressed, of course. One of the things that I had written about, and I want to ask you about, because my sister and her husband, we're very close, but they have a different view on the poor and the oppressed from me. And one of those differences would be sort of in immigration, which sort of which is very similar to Pope Francis as well. Pope Francis was very open to immigration, and my sister and my brother-in-law very much so. And so we had a conversation about immigration and the problem of immigration, or bringing people in. And I think where we differed was in terms of the size and scope of the people coming in, where they thought that I wasn't looking at the right numbers in terms of the number of people coming in. So do you think, so I'm more of my policy would be a little bit harsher on immigration. So I'm trying to So I would want to understand that I think you're more open to immigration, like my sister and brother-in-law. And so is it because the problem isn't as bad as we think?
I mean, so this statement that I made, comes from kind of an understanding of, throughout scripture, it would seem that God has what I've heard called to God's preferential option for the poor, that, God is there where the poor and the oppressed and the marginalized are. How to apply that directly to the immigration issue, I don't think is exactly black and white. And so you use the word size and scope. So then I think on paper, as a person of faith, I could say open borders. But what does that actually look like? And so I think that's where we need great discernment. I mean, I don't think, as a nation, we have laws and we have an understanding of, what would our nation look like? Not because we wouldn't benefit, I think, from cultural diversity, but just sheer number of resources and so many other things. So I wouldn't say it is a perfectly black and white issue. I mean, am I open to immigration? I think I certainly want to do my best to love immigrants. And then I think from there, we need to have policy discussions.
Yeah. Okay. Well, then I think that, yeah, it's obviously not black and white. But I think sometimes the issue is, and I guess what I would end up hearing from people, even on me, toward me, and I emigrated here.
Mhm.
I emigrated here, and as far as I know, I'm not white or male, and I'm short, I'm immigrant, so many things. And in the idea of me wanting to have tougher borders was somewhat laughable to a lot of people, and I found it very just I found it very difficult to have serious conversations about the differences that I had. And I try to have those, and sometimes people don't have those conversations, but I can have that with my sister and my brother-in-law. And we figured it out. It was kind of around the size and scope, meaning that there weren't as many people coming in as to the country as I believed there to be. And I'm not sure if I would just say believe there to be, but at least the sources that I saw, the news sources that I was watching. But it's pretty common. I mean, PBS has been writing about it. There's been a ton of people coming into the country, so I don't think it's something that is just coming from one source. It's coming from a full slate of sources.
Right. And I think the conversation you had with family, that's a perfect model. I think part of it is, am I having conversations with those who have different opinions than me? Or we are just shouting talking points? Well, my news said this, your news said that. It's just when relationship breaks down, then I can only assume that discernment and wisdom break down. And so I hope that can continue, as hard as it is. But I would hope that the people who claim the way of Jesus can say, I refuse to just cut someone off, as long as there's some healthy dialogue possible.
Yeah, no, and I think that's what's happening now. Well, that's always happened with me. I actually do like to talk to people, like who disagree with me. Just ask my husband. But
Right.
what do you think's happening with religion today, with culture today? I feel, having been a Christian, also conservative Christian in Silicon Valley. I say that only because I live in the Bay Area, and there's a number of atheists. There's a number of very, basically people with very different views from me. I've thrived in this area, by the way, just regardless. But I see a sea change. I see this embracing of religion, Christianity. What do you see? Do you see a shift?
You know, this is a great question. I just came from a conference where this was being discussed. It is strange, and you know, certainly we all maybe think of our time as more important than any other time. But you know, every 500 years or something, it seems like there are some big shifts within the church, from you know the Great Schism to the Reformation. Are we at yet another one? At least in the United States, you know, Christianity, at least on paper, is in decline in the United States, but then, you know, exploding in Africa and in some other places. And so when we talk about the future of the church, you know, it's a regional conversation in some sense. In America, I think we've gone through between you know, incredible division and kind of, you know, have we stretched the so-called Enlightenment to its, you know, to its end, where people, I did read an article where it appeared that some younger generations are coming back to what I'll call smells and bells. Like they desire the spirituality, you know, stained glass makes them feel something that, you know, the bright light of their screen cannot. And so I have great hope for the church in America. People are exploring, maybe church will look a little different. Maybe it won't be a couple hundred of us gathered in a room, but networks of house churches or other forms of gatherings. I think people gather. And this is not only human, but, you know, from the very beginning, the early church. And so how will we gather and where and when? I think that could change, but we will gather. And I think we will share good news and serve people. And so I'm very hopeful, but I've also been known as naive.
Are you more hopeful in the last, like, have you been always hopeful? Are you more hopeful? Is it because there's a marked change in me and what's happening here in Silicon Valley. Okay. And so is there a difference in the last year? Would you say, or is it the same?
You know, I should say a caveat to my hope. I think, Bambi, I'm hopeful as an act of defiance, you know, a kind of like our community at the end of every service says, all shall be well, and all shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well, from St. Julian of Norwich. And that's not a Pollyanna, it'll probably be fine. It is, let's try to be the kind of people so that it shall be well, and proclaim hope, because, you know, in our world today, it's so easy to say, well, we had a good run, or, you know, or I just see nothing but division and animosity. No, let's claim a little light here, and let's seek ways. So even though we're a bit of doom and gloom, some of us in the United States, I think that the people called Christians should be stubbornly hopeful and work towards that.
That's great. That's a great message. How would you define Christianity in the 20th century? How would you define Christianity in the 21st century, given the internet, AI? Has it changed in terms of what's the predominant sort of view? And I know that's a kind of a tough question, but right. I mean, what you brought up, the Reformation, that changed in terms of, you know, we're saved by grace, right? That was, I mean, we knew it. You know, Jesus kept telling us for 1,500 years. But that, all of a sudden, that became the predominant view, and the Enlightenment. Now we have AI. We have, you know, a different world, different culture. What do you think? Do you think that there is going to be a different view? I know it's hard. I ask everybody, like, I don't.
It's okay. It's a big question, but one I'm very interested in. I mean, I'd say I can at least say some marker shifts between, you know, kind of 20th and 21st century Christianity. I think 20th century Christianity, you know, churches were, it seemed like in many ways, very full. there was what I would call kind of brand loyalty, like we're United Methodists. You know, this neighborhood was started in the 50s. You put out a sign and you say, we're Methodist or Episcopal or whatever, and the Methodist or Episcopalians come. I think those days are mostly over. I think, you know, people were like kayak, you know, people check who's cheapest, United or Southwest Airlines. No, I shouldn't totally say that analogy, but I think people are looking for a community that
which has the better time slot, like, you know.
Yeah, I mean, it's true. Church shopping is absolutely a thing. So I think there are the denominational shift away from of that to an extent. I think how people perceived who is a Christian and who is not, and kind of the social network maybe that supported people in. You know, the church was more place of family life and perhaps, you know, business and these kind of things. And that's where, you know, when you were, you know, having a baby, people would swoop in with meals. And so I think today, you know, although some of that still happens, I see, so I'm just speaking from Austin, and perhaps it's similar. You know, I think sometimes people church would more likely be like a Sunday brunch together. That is community, but, you know, I try to invite people into more of a, you know, spiritual, you know, time developing relationships through Jesus. I think although the church might be declining in number, or at least number of people gathering in churches, I think the voice of Christianity is certainly still at the society's the forefront of our mind. And so is there kind of an identity crisis, so to speak, going on in the church right now? Like, are we mostly about proclaiming, you know, salvation through the life and death and resurrection of Jesus? Are we mostly about proclaiming the good news of the coming kingdom of God? Are we mostly about beliefs or works, or what is it? And so that's what my colleague friends and I are wrestling through, how to share the good news in a world that is so rapidly changing. It's kind of making our head spin. And so a lot of Christians I've met today are really good at deconstructing things, like, let's say what all's wrong with our faith, but are not so good at reconstructing. Like, okay, if this is not how you do church, well, how do we gather? And so that's a part of conversation I am today. But I am hopeful that this younger generation is engaging more perhaps in spirituality than we think. Big question.
It's a big question, but it's interesting that you say that. It's sort of, what do we think as a church? And my brother, who was a pastor, he passed away. Yeah, it probably drove me closer to Jesus, actually. One of the reasons why I started my We Over Me is because my brother wasn't there, and he was yelling at me from heaven, just saying, stop leaning on me and just figure this thing out on your own. But so I have conversations with him all the time. But he wrote this book called Simple Discipleship. And he would always say that it's basically, he would say that we meet as a church. We're not meeting at church, but we meet as a church, so we can meet anywhere. So we would say, like, let's meet as a church, and we would get together, and sometimes we would have service at our house, because that's what yeah, I love it too. And I do like the simple discipleship idea, which is really, it's just one-on-one. Really, I mean, who else could you impact? You can't impact a whole, you know, I go to a church that's rather large. And I wonder sometimes, and I do feel feels impersonal sometimes, because you don't have that interaction, that one-on-one interaction, but it's such great music. I love music.
Right.
You know, it's hard when there's good music.
Right.
Like
That's
to
what
say,
your brother said, as a church. And I think that defines more it's always the simple yet forgotten reminder that, you know, the people are gathering as the people of God, as a church. You know, it's not a once a week thing I kind of attend or go to or whatever it may be. And so, you know, when I go into coffee shops around here, I always see these small groups of people gathering and studying scripture and praying with each other. And I was like, okay, this is like beautiful. They're gathering as church. And these are a lot of young folks. So
yeah, and maybe that's you know, with AI and with the internet, maybe there's a way for more people, right? And that the whole point is that the good news will be shared with everyone. And maybe these are new ways that can just get to people we don't even know how. But the unreached, like my brother used to say, the unreached people groups. I think that's what he used to say. So okay, I'll give you the final word for those who want to, you know, from a biblical perspective, you know, how do we look at new technologies? How do we embrace new technology? What does Jesus say about new technologies and how we should be, you know, viewing them?
Right. I mean, I think back through times in history as a model from, you know, the printing press, you know, bringing scripture around the globe, to the radio initially, you know, being looked at some skepticism by some Christians, to the you know, on live stream. Now people always say, "Oh, I loved watching your service. I was sick at home," and so AI. I believe with proper discernment and wisdom, that this can undoubtedly be a technology that connects people to the Spirit of God. Now, that could be a whole other conversation. You know, to what extent, how do we discern the Spirit of God within a technology? But if God can work through people and situations and scripture and music and all of these things, I absolutely believe God can work through technology. And, you know, kind of in my own tradition, we call it the Wesleyan quadrilateral, which is like the dorkiest thing ever. But, you know, if a leg kind of has a stool has four legs, you know, scripture being the most important, experience, reason, and tradition. And so we're using these things then to discern if this technology is of the Spirit. And so I'm all for it, and just hope and pray that church and our government and others will be wise in its implementation.
Great. All right, wise words. Thank you so much, Jay.
Thank you, Bamboo. I really enjoyed it.
I'm speaking with Pastor Jay Cooper of Violet Crown City Church. I'm Baby Francisco Royce, and you've been listening to CRT.